Okay, today we're going to be talking about insects, and particularly the requirement to check fruits and vegetables before we eat them. As we all know, a person is not allowed to eat an insect. And sometimes right in front of you, that there's an insect in something. Like, for example, if you have a grapefruit juice that's colored with carmine is made from the crushing up of this cochineal bug, then you know that there's a bug in there. Or you pick up a piece of celery and you see on the bottom of the celery, you see there's a bunch of dead bugs sitting on there. So in that case, it's obvious there's a bug there. It's also midaraisa to eat it. That's obvious. But in most cases, we look at fruits and vegetables where we don't see any insects. And the question is just, do I have to check it, or how do I have to check it? Because there might be insects in there. So maybe there are, maybe there aren't. And I'm approaching this as, should I check it, or do I have to check this thing? And we understand intuitively that not all vegetables are the same. So some I do have to check, and some I don't have to check, or the rules may not be exactly the same for all items. We figure that on our own, we understand that. But in truth, there are two dividing lines, two cutoffs that decide about when I do or don't have to check something. And the first is like this: if more than half of this type of food is going to have bugs in it, then midaraisa, I must assume that there's a bug in this item, and therefore I have to get rid of the bugs, find them, or get rid of them before I eat the food. We call that their Muchzak b'terlaim. It's assumed that there are bugs in this food because in more than half the times there's going to be. At other times, but nowadays it's not so common to have food that's that infested. The way they do pest control in farms, etc. It's not so common to have that. So in cases where less than half of the food have bugs in them, midaraisa, you're not required to check it. But midrabanan, we say that if it's matzui, if it's a miut hamatzui, then you're mechuyev to check the food. And midrabanan, you're mechuyev to check that food. So I'm going to explain what miut hamatzui means in a second. What does that mean? It's matzui, it's common. Matzui means common. It's a miut hamatzui, it's a small amount that's common. I'll explain that in a minute. But the truth is, I want to point out that idea that if something is matzui, then midrabanan you have to check for it. That's not a concept that starts in Hilchos Telaim. In fact, the source of it is in Hilchos Treifas, where the rule is that there are many ways an animal could become a treifa. There could be something wrong with it that makes us say that this animal is a treifa. But in practice, the Gemara says the one thing we check for is they check the lungs. And the way the Rajba explains it is because it's matzui that the lungs will have something wrong with them that would make the animal a treifa, and that's why you have to check for lungs. You don't have to check the brains, you don't have to check the tumas hagidin, you don't have to check buk da'atma. There's other ways that the animal can become a treifa. You're not required to check all those ways because you only have to check for the things that are matzui. But that's of course, it happens to be that in practice nowadays they check a little bit more for things that are matzui nowadays. But the concept comes from there, and that is that you only required to look out for things that are matzui, that are common. For it to happen, or reasonably common for it to happen, and if it's rare that it should happen, then you're not required even to check for that also. Okay, so now I've used this term a number of times.
Rabbi Cohen, let me just interrupt you first. Rabbi Cohen.
Yes.
Rabbi Cohen. Unfortunately, it's either on my end or your end. It's a little bit grainy, unstable. So I'm wondering. And it's many times I've discovered that what helps the recording and what helps the transmission is if you shut your camera. And I think the Olam here is mature enough to hear.
If you'd like,
seeing,
no problem.
Because I believe that will help. Because right now.
Okay. So in describing what it means to be matzui, there's two basic approaches to what is considered matzui, and then within those two approaches, there's even some breaks down a little bit further than that. And the first one is what Rav Vosner and Rav Belsky would say is, and they would say is, what matzui means is that it's a situation where no one is surprised when they find an insect in this place. For example, if you pick up romaine lettuce and you find an insect in it, no one is surprised. Everybody knows that romaine lettuce has insects in it sometimes. There's nothing strange about that. If I picked up a carrot and there was a bug inside of it, that would be, whoa, how strange that is that there's bugs in my carrots. Excuse me. So we would say that insects are matzui in lettuce, but they're not matzui in carrots because you don't find at all any kind of surprise in that. That's how they looked at it. And however, that was one approach. Most hashgachas, most people involved in this follow a Mishkanas Yaakov. And the Mishkanas Yaakov says that the way you decide whether something is matzui or not is whether there's an infestation is it more than 10% of it is infested. Remember, I told you that if it's more than 50% of it is infested, then there's a chiv deraisa. You assume that there are bugs here, and with deraisa you have to check it. If it's less than 50%, you don't have to. But the Mishkanas Yaakov says he brings it right from a Gemara that if it's more than 10%, that's when you have to do midrabanan. But if it would be less than 10%, let's say it would be 7%, then it would be less than 10%. Then you don't need that. You don't have to check it at all. It's not matzui at all. Now, what did he mean when he said 10%? In an animal, it's a little sort of easier to figure out. If 10% of animals have trephis in their lungs, we check them. If less than 10% have trephis in their brains, we don't check them. So there's different approaches to this. So Shlomo Zalman Auerbach and Rabbi Yashiv said that what it means when we say 10%, it means 10% of the units of the vegetable. Like for example, if we have a lettuce, so we're talking about lettuce. So is there a bug in one of every 10 heads of lettuce? Each head is a unit. So would there be one bug in 10 heads? That's considered matzui. That's how they looked at it from the perspective of the vegetable, the food being checked. But Rav Schechter and Rav Schwartz did not think like that. They said, no. It doesn't. No one cares if there are bugs in vegetables. The concern of bugs is because I might eat them. So we don't have to look at whether the units of the vegetables have the heads of lettuce. We have to look at the servings that a person would eat. So is there going to be a bug in every 10 servings a person is going to eat? So for example, if that head of lettuce I just told you, one head serves 5 people, then it only considered matzui if there's one bug in every 2 heads, because there's those 2 heads serve 10 people. If there's one bug in 2 heads, then we say that 10% of the people who use this lettuce are going to be eating a bug. Then you're mechuyev to check it midrabanan. Okay, so that's now there's yet even a further breakdown within this understanding that says you look by servings. What does that mean? What do we mean? An average serving, or does it mean? Is that an individual decision? So most follow, which is what the Sirashi does. We say it goes by serving sizes, and it goes by the serving of an average, or the upper range of average of typical what a person would eat that food. Okay, so now I've told you some different ways of looking at it, but the truth is none of these ways of measuring miut hamatzui is perfect. Okay, each one of them's got their own issues. For example, I told you Shlomo Zalman says that it depends on the unit of the food. Okay, so for a head of lettuce, it's pretty easy. One head is 1 unit. What happens if it's a raspberry? So is it 1 in every 10 raspberries? Is it 1 in every 10 pints of raspberries? What's the unit for the raspberry? And how about if it's parsley? Is it 1 strict piece of parsley? 1 bundle of parsley? Well, how are you going to make the decision? What about the opposite? What happens if the things that come in huge, like cabbages, they're cabbages that are used commercially, they come 10 pounds in a cabbage. So if that means so we say each cabbage is a unit, so that means if there's 1 bug in 100 pounds of cabbage, meaning 10 cabbages, that's enough to be considered matzui? That seems odd also. So this idea to say by units, it works well when we're talking a head of lettuce. Everyone sort of sees that as the unit, or 1 thing of celery. But what about when we have other things that are very small or very large? Okay, and what happens now let's go to the other people who will say we look by serving sizes. Well, what happens if the same food is used in different ways? And the example of that is basil. You could put basil in pasta sauce, salad dressing, veggie burgers, or pasta pesto. And each one of them uses a different amount. So the serving of basil is not the same for all of them. For example, one time they did a study on a certain type of basil, and it turned out that there was 1 bug for every 80 servings of pasta sauce, 1 for every 250 servings of salad dressing, and 1 in every 300 serving of veggie burgers, because I guess there was very little parsley in all those. But guess what? In the pasta pesto, there was 1 insect in every single portion, because pasta pesto is almost completely made out of basil. So which one of those is the serving? Which we say, is this considered matzui? It's not matzui. Well, it depends what you're eating it with. So how are you going to decide that? Okay, so all of these questions, these bunch of questions I asked you, support the idea that we should look we should look at the surprise system. The idea says is anyone surprised when they see bugs in here? But in truth, most people follow the serving size and sort of work out these kind of issues. Now, in most cases, the difference between one cheat and the next is not so. In practice, is not usually such a difference. In practice, usually the experts who know these things can sort of figure out, is it matzui or is it not matzui? It doesn't make such a difference. There was one situation where there was a dramatic difference between these, and that was, as you may well know, there are something called copepods, a kind of insects, a kind of whatever, some kind of a organism that's in the New York City water. We're not going to talk about whether that's mutter or asur. Let's work with the assumption that those insects are asur. Okay, whether they are or not is not today's discussion. Now, assuming that they were asur, the question was then, is it matzui? Remember, if it's not matzui, if it would only happen one in every 50 servings, then we wouldn't have to care about it. It could be there, but I only have to worry about it if it's matzui. So the people who were involved in this, the people who were trying to, suggest that it was asur, those people went around and they made all kinds of calculations to show that in fact there was a 10% infestation level. Okay, well then that's what they were working on based on this idea of 10%. And Reb Belsky says, tell me something. He says there are 8-9 million people living in New York City. Okay, the people have been drinking New York City water that's the same water for 100 years, and all of them were surprised as anything to hear that there are bugs there. Even you go there today, you drink the water. No, most people who drink it wouldn't believe that there are bugs in there. So he says, how can you tell me that it's matzui when nobody knows it's there? No, everybody was really surprised to hear that. So in this case, Reb Belsky's way of looking at it as are people surprised to hear there's an insect there that in fact said this should not be considered matzui, while the 10% rule would say that it was matzui. And so in this case, Reb Belsky's approach was more lenient than the other ones were. Usually his is more strict, in fact. Okay, now, just other things to keep in mind when you're thinking about whether something is matzui is, first of all, we have to decide which insects are large enough to be forbidden. Again, not a topic for today, but only the ones that are big enough to be asur are the ones that count. Also, you have to think about how are people going to eat this food. Like, for example, I mentioned to you celery beforehand. So celery, there's lots of bugs on celery. If you take out a piece of celery off the thing, there's lots of times that there are bugs there. But everybody washes it off first. Well, after you wash it, there's almost very rarely are there bugs. So you have to think about, are we going to eat it before or after washing? And you have to think about the seasons that it grows on, locations of the farm, how they clean it, etc. So there's lots to think about in making a determination whether something is matzui, whether something is matzui or not. Okay, so until now, I've been talking to you about Miut hamatzui. Now I'm going to move to deciding is something matzui or is it not matzui. Now I'm going to move on to the idea of something being Muchzak. So if you remember, I said to you that, Muchzak means is that more than half of the things have an insect in them. Okay, and so again, if it's even matzui, you already have to check it. But I'm going to talk to you about 3 different areas where it makes a difference to know whether it's just Miut hamatzui and I have to check it midrabanan, or is it Muchzak and I have to check it midaraisa. So one of them is like this: what happens if I have a situation where it's not possible for me to check this thing, okay? And it's impossible for me to check this food. So if my requirement to check it is a chiv deraisa, midaraisa, I have to assume that there's a bug in there. Then the fact that I can't check it or get it out doesn't make a difference. It's not going to help me anything. If I can't check it, but in practice I know that there's an insect there. Midaraisa, I'm mechoyev to get it out. Too bad. But if it's drabanan, then there's actually a basis for saying if I have no way to check it, I have no way to get it out. Chazal maybe didn't make any requirement. They only said do what you can to get rid of it. But if it's impossible to do it, then it could be that I would not have to do that. What would be the basis of that? Why would I think that if I can't get it out, then I'm not required to? So in the source for that would come from Hilchos Trefus. As I mentioned to you, Hilchos Trefus is really the source that you have to check things in the first place when it's matzui. And it says like this: when you check when you shecht an animal, you need to check the lungs to see if the animal is a treifa. And what happens if you shechted the animal and the lungs got misplaced accidentally? No one got to check them before they got taken away. So the Shulchan Aruch says you're allowed to eat the meat. Why? Because the chiyuv to check it is only drabanan. Midoraisa, more than half of the animals are not treifas. So midoraisa, you're not required to check it. It's only midorabanan that you have to check it anyhow. So if it's impossible to check, then no problem. Then you could eat the meat and Chazal just leave you as is. So according to the Shulchan Aruch, we have a basis for saying that if I can't check it anymore, then I'm okay and I could just eat the food. I could eat the meat. Now, in that case, in Hilchos Treifas, the Ramah is machmir, and he says that except in case of hefsid gadol, you should not eat the meat. So that would sound like that would not help us over here. But Rabbi Yashiv says that if you have a food that it will be impossible to check it, and that's going to make it also for an extended period of time, a whole season, you're not going to be able to eat this food. He says that qualifies as a hefsid gadol. So in our case, where if you had a food where it was impossible to check it, not in a one-time setup, but in a long-term setup that you will not be able to check this food, then the Ramah would agree that if it's only miut hamatzui, then you'd be allowed to eat. Okay, I'm talking very theoretical, but I'm going to give you now an example of this thing that I've been describing. And the example is frozen raspberries and blackberries. When the raspberries and blackberries are fresh, then it's possible to find and get the bugs out of them. And that is, you could take them. I should show you a video of this, but you take them and you drop them, onto a piece of paper from a foot or two up. And if you do it correctly, the bugs will leave. They just run out of the berry. I don't know, they're scared of it, or whatever it is, but they run out and they leave the berries. Well, once you have frozen blackberries and raspberries, that's not going to work because the bugs are dead. They're not going to be able to get out. So the only way to do it, there are ways to get the bugs out, but once you did that, there would be no fruit left to eat. You basically destroy the fruit to eat it. So some people who are experts in these kind of work say that raspberries and blackberries are muchzak b'tolayim. More than 50% of them have bugs in them. Well, if that's true, the fact that I can't get the bugs out doesn't help me, and I can't eat them. It won't make a difference. If they're muchzak b'tolayim, I can't eat them. Others believe that it's only a miut hamatzui, meaning the infestation level is not muchzak, it's only between 10 and 50%, in which case I would be allowed to, this, what I just said to you would be correct, which is I can't get it, I have no way to get it out. It will mean that I can't eat this food, and therefore I would not be required, I'd be allowed to eat it without doing anything else to it. Now, there is a challenge to what I just said, and a challenge to this example, and the challenge is that as I said to you, in fresh raspberries and blackberries, there are things to do to get the bugs out. Frozen, there isn't. So maybe it's not fair to say that, I can't eat frozen blackberries, and therefore I'm allowed to say it's like a hefsid gadol. No, maybe not. You say, come on, you could have eaten fresh. So they say, I only want to eat frozen blackberries, or I can only get frozen raspberries. That might be not an accurate portrayal to say that therefore it should be mutter. Okay, but as an example, it was a good for us as an example of this idea that sometimes if it's not possible to check it, then it would depend. If it was muchzak b'tolayim, you couldn't eat the food. If it was just a miut hamatzui, you'd be allowed to eat it. Okay, now to a second application. What happens when something is muchzak b'tolayim, when it's more than 50% of them have bugs, we assume that there's for sure an insect inside of there. If it's miut hamatzui, then it's possible there's a bug inside there. So the Shulchan Aruch / the Shach says that an afternoon is like this. What happens if I took the food and I cooked the food without checking it? I was supposed to check it. I forgot to. Something happened, and I cooked it without checking the food. Now, when you cook a vegetable or something that might have bugs in it, in most cases, that means there's a chance that the cooking will break apart the bugs, either disintegrate them completely, or at least break them apart to the point that they're not in a barrier and they can be bottled. So, to the point that the food will be mutter. Now, I don't know that that's what happened. It's possible that the cooking did that, and it's possible that it didn't. No one really knows. So, if the whole infestation level was just miut hamatzui, it was only a suffix in the first place. Maybe there's a bug, and therefore I have to check. Maybe yes, and maybe not. Now there's a second suffix, which is, the second suffix is, maybe the cooking destroyed the bug that would have been in there. That counts as a sveka, and therefore I'd be allowed to eat the food b'diavad. If it was already cooked, I'd be allowed to eat it. If it had been muchzak b'tolim, we knew that there was a bug in there, then I know that I have to assume that there's a bug inside of there. The fact that the cooking might have destroyed the bug is not good enough. It's just one suffix. A suffix, we'll call it a suffix deraisa. I will not be allowed to eat that food. I would only be allowed to eat it if the processing was so serious that I know for sure it was destroyed. Like, for example, if I made jelly, okay, I took raspberry jelly. So jelly is different than jam. Jelly is made by you first liquefy the food, like you make grape juice out of the grapes, and then you solidify it back into a jelly, as opposed to a jam, which is just ground up fruit. So if I turned it into a jelly, I turned it into a complete liquid first. I know for sure the bugs have been obliterated at that point. Then, if it had been done b'diavad, you'd be allowed to eat it even if it was muchzak. Otherwise, you wouldn't be allowed to. And now for our last nafkamina, which for many people is very practical, is that like this. The two things I told you until now about a food that was already cooked, or you'd be impossible to check it, those are cases of b'diavad. Something happened. Not b'diavad, I don't want to say b'diavad. Both are cases where there's no way to check the food. At this point, there's nothing to check. I can't possibly check the cooked food or the food that can't be checked. And then I have a question. But now we have a question is of an application of a person who could do it even lechatchila to not check a food that could be checked. And that is like this. We have a general rule that a person can't take an isser, something that's usser, and do something to get it mixed into a food in a way that makes it mutter. Okay, you're not allowed to I take a little bit of isser, pour it into my soup, and I know it's going to be batal. You're not allowed to do that. So, like in the case beforehand that I told you about the food that was cooked and now made a sveka and you're allowed to eat it, that's only mutter b'diavad if you already did it. You're not allowed to do that on purpose. You're not allowed to purposely cook food and then say, and I turned it into a sveka, now I'm allowed to eat it. That's a type of ein mevatlanis l'chatchila. Now, but there's an exception to the rule of ein mevatlanis l'chatchila, and that is, what happens if I'm trying to do something, and I know that inadvertently that's going to lead to bittul of the isser. That's called ein kavanas levatel. I'm not trying to do the bittul. I know it might happen or will happen, but I'm not trying to do it. It's just happening sort of on the side. My main goal is something else that's not included in ein mevatlanis l'chatchila. So the mechaber applies this to the halachas of checking items for bugs. The case he specifically is talking about is wheat kernels. I have wheat kernels that I think may be infested, so I'm mechuyev to check them. Now, most people don't eat wheat kernels as is. They grind them into flour first, and then you use them for baking. Well, so the person, when he grinds the wheat kernels, what's going to happen to them? Good chance. What's going to happen is that a good chance that the bugs will get ground up, just like in the cooking case, and therefore, so the Shulchan Aruch says is you're allowed to grind the wheat, knowing that will cause the bugs to get the bugs will get ground together with the wheat also, and I'm allowed to do that. Even I don't have to check the wheat first, and that's because my goal here is to grind wheat. I'm making flour. I do that every day of the week. I grind my wheat into flour. The fact that gets rid of the bugs also, that's ein kavanas levatel, and that's okay for me to do that. So now there are two conditions to this kugel that I said to you. One comes from a Taz, one comes from a Rikvega with Nei Behuda. Okay, and there are two conditions. The first is this only works if the infestation is just Miut hamatzui. If the infestation if the food is Muchzak b'tolim, this will not work. It only works when it's a suffix, when it's a Miut hamatzui, then it would work. Second is that it only works if the person takes steps to show that he's not trying to get the bugs in here. He has to do some kind of a minimal cleaning or inspection to show that he's not trying to get the bugs in here, and that makes him sort of ein kavanas levatel. They're just happening sort of by mistake. And the applications that we have for this we have two very practical applications. Then the same idea: smoothies and broccoli kugel. In both cases, you're taking a food that could have bugs in it. In the case of smoothies, we'll say you're taking strawberries. And in the case of broccoli kugel, you're taking broccoli. So both of those are foods that need to be checked before you eat them. Now, The person who's making the smoothie or the broccoli kugel, what's he doing? He's going to grind up the strawberries and the broccoli in order to make his food. Now, the reason why he's grinding up the food is not because he's trying to get rid of the bugs. He's grinding it up because that's how you make a smoothie. You don't put in whole strawberries. You grind them up and you make a smoothie out of it. So the person is ein kavanah zvato. He's not here to try to grind up the bugs and make a suffix to make the bugs allowed to be in them. So if the strawberries or the other ingredients or the broccoli are only considered miut hamatzui, and the person does some kind of a brief washing or rinsing to try to get rid of bugs that are easy and on the surface, then the person would be allowed to make this food. We would say it's only miut hamatzui. He took a step that shows that he's trying to get rid of the bugs. So and he's making a food that's how you make the food. You grind up. It's part of making the food. That would be mutter for the person to do that. But that's only true if it's miut hamatzui. If it's muchzak, if the infestation level is to the point that it's muchzak b'tilayim, it's more than half of them, then this would not be mutter. The person would not be allowed to do this. So that is to say, before you jump ahead and do this, you need to talk to your local expert, or call the CRC office, or whoever it is. Talk to someone and say to them, "Tell me, I want to use broccoli. I want to use strawberries. I want to use raspberries. I want to use lettuce. I want to use whatever it is in my smoothie or in the food that I'm going to be making this with. Is it miut hamatzui or is it muchzak b'tilayim?" And in fact, if you look at our website, when it talks about making smoothies, it will say you can use these things in smoothies without checking or just with a quick rinse, and other things you cannot use. And that's what the dividing line is between: are they just miut hamatzui, in which case this would be allowed, or are they muchzak and they would not be allowed.